All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Living Jewishly podcast, formerly known as, oh no, this is Everyday Judaism. That's right, we changed it to Everyday Judaism. Welcome, everybody, to the Everyday Judaism podcast, formerly known as Living Jewishly. So, we're going to skip a little bit and we'll go back to where we were holding, but I wanted to learn the laws of Challah. What is Challah? The Torah commands us in Numbers chapter 15, verse 17 through verse 21, that when one brings bread, when one bakes bread, they should take part of the bread called challah. That's what it's called. But it's very interesting that we name our bread by the mitzvah we do with it. Bread is not called challah. We call challah is the part that we take from it and we give to the temple, to the Kohen. But today we don't have a temple, we don't have the Kohen. So what do? We take about an egg size of challah out of our 5 pound. We'll see soon the exact quantity. And we put it aside, we burn it. The halacha says to burn it in the same oven you're going to bake the challah in, or you just dispose of it and throw it out. The idea is that we're showing that we are committed and dedicated to the recognition that everything is from Hashem. And when Hashem gives us a gift of bread, we don't just enjoy our bread, we give something back. We recognize that it comes from Hashem. So from the very first, you're about to put it in the oven, you're ready to braid it and make it all beautiful and eat it. Cut off a piece of the dough and you separate it. That's called challah. Okay? So when you're looking for challah, bread, that we name it challah because of the mitzvah that we do with it. And if you look on any box of matzah, you look at any box of kosher matzah or any bread, you'll see it'll say challah has been taken. Challah, what does it mean challah has been taken? It means it has been separated. Challah has been taken. Okay, so that's a commandment in the Torah. Now, like most mitzvahs in the Torah, this mitzvah biblically is not obligated outside of the land of Israel. Our sages require us to perform this mitzvah even outside of the land of Israel for a number of reasons. The Ramban teaches us a very important thing, that every mitzvah is really only obligated to us inside the land of Israel. Outside of the land of Israel, it's not obligated. So here we are, we're living in Houston, Texas, so we're not obligated technically, according to some opinions, for any of the mitzvahs. Says the Ramban, no, we have to fulfill the mitzvahs and we have to ingrain them into our existence, A, so that we remain Jewish, B, so that our children remain Jewish, and C, so that we never forget the commandments of the Torah. So even though we are outside of the land of Israel, we're still obligated to the Torah and the mitzvahs and to observe them appropriately, and challah is not an exception. Okay, so now you don't have to live in Israel to observe this mitzvah. Now, what is challah? Any of the 5 species of grain, which is wheat, barley, spelt, oats, and rye, when you bake them, you need to take challah in the process of baking. Okay, so a dough that has been kneaded from one of the 5 types of grain is subject to the obligation of setting aside challah. Before you take the challah, before you separate the challah, you recite a blessing. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech olam. Blessed are you, Hashem, King of the universe, Hashem, our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with its commandments and commanded us to separate challah from the dough. And you take a piece of the dough, like the size of an egg or an olive, but a large olive, and you burn it in the same oven that you're about to bake the bread in. Now, I want to tell you that it's a very, very powerful mitzvah. And if a person can perform this mitzvah weekly, in fact, the Arizal says that there's a special power to baking bread for Shabbos and taking the challah after noon on Friday. You make it special for Shabbos. Very special power. Now, it's a mitzvah that is more obligated on the women. There's a very deep Kabbalistic reason to this, because according to many of the commentaries, what did Eve feed Adam in the Garden of Eden? So many people say apple because it's the easiest for us to teach our children. There was an apple tree and she gave him a bite of the apple. That's incorrect according to most opinions. There was actually bread that grew straight from the tree, which is why the curse to man was that now you're not going to have bread ready made from a tree. You're going to have to, from the sweat of your brow, you're going to have to prepare the flour and everything else, work the land. You're not going to get it anymore from a tree. And according to most opinions, what Eve gave Adam in the sin of the tree of knowledge was she gave him bread. And this is now the woman's opportunity to correct that sin, which is why this mitzvah is more an obligation for women than for men. How much of dough is required? Means if you just bake a little cookie, you don't need to, it's one cookie. It's not a big deal. But if you have, I'll just get down to the bottom of it. If it's equivalent to the volume of 43 1/5 eggs, which is about 5 pounds. If you take a 5-pound bag of flour and you mix it with water, when that dough starts to rise, then you can separate the challah right before you're ready to braid it. If two doughs were needed separately, each one containing less than the minimum amount of challah for the challah requirement, and were subsequently joined together, they are subject to the challah separation requirement. So if you had, 2.5 pounds here, 2.5 pounds there, but now you bring them together, so now they have the obligation of separating the challah. Matzah that you are baking for Pesach is also dough and also needs to be separated. I had the great privilege when I was in Israel a few years ago, and I baked matzah with my rabbi for Pesach. So he separated challah from the matzah, and you take a full matzah because you take an actual matzah, which is after it's baked. After it's baked, you have a basket of matzah, they're all lined up. So anything that's in the basket is included. Anything that's out of the basket is not included. If it's even partially out of the basket, it's fine. So if you have, let's say, a full basket, and then you have more that you stuff into that basket and it's in the basket, but not all in the basket, it's included. And it fulfills the obligation of separating challah when you do so. So you take one of the matzahs, and that's put aside or destroyed as the challah that you're taking. Those that are not inside that basket are not included. Even if they're part of the batch, they're not included. So I had the privilege when I was there with my rabbi that I took the challah, and you have to also take, because it's flour from the land of Israel, you have to take the trumot and maasrot, you have to take the tithes that you also have to separate. So I did that as well. Aval iminiach hamatzos bisadin, but if they are placed on a sheet, and also you cover them with a sheet by folding the sheet over the matzahs, then the sheet has the effect of a vessel and combines them all. So if you put all the matzahs on a sheet, and then you take the second half of the sheet and cover it all, so everything that's in that is included in the challah that you separate from that batch. Sourdough that is taken from the dough so as to be used to make another dough leaven, right? So you're taking, because it has some of the yeast in there, and you're now sharing it with another batch, so that leavening agent can assist. May be taken before the challah of the dough is taken and set aside. However, sourdough that is being taken to be used to ferment a beverage, okay, like borscht, must be removed from the dough only after they have set aside challah. Okay. On Pesach, the Torah prohibits owning all chametz, including sourdough. Therefore, in order to bake bread after Pesach, the baker must acquire sourdough from a non-Jewish source. This affects the procedure of separating challah, as will be explained in the Seif. La'achar Pesach, after Pesach, shalokchim seor me'akum, when you take the sourdough, when you purchase the sourdough from a non-Jew, lechametz bo isa, as a leavening agent for your dough. Tzrichin lizor, you have to be careful. Lahafish challah yoser gadol mima shahaya hasaor. To set aside, you have to be careful to set aside a challah, as challah, a portion of dough larger than the size of the sourdough. Ha'ose isa, one who makes dough for the purpose of cooking or for frying. Mafrish meno challah blo bracha. You separate the challah without a blessing. Ve'imos in lafos ktsas mimeno. And if one makes the dough intending to bake a portion of it, even if he intends to bake only a small portion of it, he must set aside challah from this dough with a blessing. Okay, only 3 more halachas here. If a person is making bread with juice, you can make it with apple juice, then it is you have to make sure. So listen, if the dough is being kneaded with eggs or other fruit juices, there are a number of uncertainties regarding the challah's obligation. Therefore, one must mix into the dough at the time that it is being kneaded either a little bit of water, milk, bees honey, wine, or olive oil. For then, if one of these liquid of these ingredients is in the dough, one must certainly set aside challah for the dough and do so with a blessing, because we want to make sure that it is actually, if there's no requirement to separate challah, then separating challah and reciting a blessing would be a blessing in vain. We want to make sure that we recite the blessing, and the blessing is, so if you put in a drop of water in there, it will immediately require the blessing. Although the mitzvah of challah is incumbent upon the owner of the dough, he may appoint another adult Jew to perform the mitzvah on his behalf. One may not, however, perform the mitzvah on behalf of the owner without being specifically appointed to do so. There are a few exceptions to this rule. Mitzvahs hafrashas challah shayach la'isha ba'alas habayis. The mitzvah, you're welcome to join us. The mitzvah of setting aside challah belongs to the woman who is the lady of the house. Ach im ha'isha. However, if the woman eina bevesa is not in her own home, v'yesh lachush ki be'od shetavo tiskalkel ha'isa, and there is reason for concern that by the time she comes home, the dough will spoil. Az yichola gam mishareses o adam acher lahafrish. Then a Jewish maidservant or another person may set aside the challah. Shachach la'afrish challah be'erev Shabbos. What happens if you forgot to set aside challah on erev Shabbos, before Shabbos, and now it's Shabbos? So what do? So in the diaspora outside of the land of Israel, ochel b'Shabbos, you may eat the bread on Shabbos, even before the challah is put aside. You take a side part, and you take one slice, one piece of the challah, and separate the challah from it after Shabbos. And the piece left over must be large enough so that one can set aside challah from it, and some will still remain that is fit for non-sacred use. The ba'inum, for we require that the portion that remains after challah has been set aside be identifiable, so not crumbs. It should be a sizable amount. Now, what do you do if this Shabbos that you're about to, you realize on Shabbos that you need to set aside challah after Shabbos. Okay, that same scenario, but Pesach begins after Shabbos on that year. So what are you going to do? You can't save it to after Shabbos. In such a case, there's a great dilemma. Alkain tzarich kol ish liyizar be'erev Shabbos. Therefore, every person should be very careful before Shabbos to make sure that they separate the challah carefully. V'lahaskir al hafrashas challah, to remind his household about the requirement of setting aside challah. And we know that the halacha tells us, and we repeat this every Friday, as the sun descends, as the sun sets, we say that there are three things that a man has to declare in his house. Isartem, iravtem, hadlikos haner. Make sure that you separate the challah, make sure that you light the candle, and make sure that you have the eruv up so that people can carry. And that concludes the laws of making challah. How you make it, the braiding, there are many different customs for it, but there's no halacha that requires it to be made a certain way. We want it to be beautiful because it's a mitzvah, and we want to beautify a mitzvah. That's what the Torah commands us, to beautify our mitzvahs. The more precious something is, the more beautiful you want to make it. Just like flowers. When I go pick out flowers for my wife, I don't just say, just give me a batch. I don't care. It's flowers. No, we want to find the freshest flowers, the most beautiful ones, because it represents our relationship with our spouse, and on a much greater level, our relationship with the Almighty. When we perform a mitzvah, oh, just give me the cheapest mezuzah. No. I want the nicest mezuzah. I'm not talking about the case, by the way. The case is not mezuzah. That's a mezuzah case. I'm talking about the actual mezuzah, what the scribe writes. You want it to be with the finest. We all know. We want someone to write. I remember we used to do calligraphy when we were children. My parents were trying to get us to calm down a little, right, from our hyper state. So my parents got us calligraphy pens, and we would, so, we all know people have better handwriting. Some people have worse handwriting. Who would you ask to write the invitation names on the invitation? Someone with a good handwriting, or just like, it doesn't make a difference? No, you want the nicest handwriting. You want the nicest handwriting on your mezuzah. And therefore, it's going to cost you more. Right? A mezuzah, you don't want to go cheap on. The same thing with tefillin, same thing with the Sefer Torah, same thing with your Shabbos clothes. You want to have the nicest clothes because you're performing a mitzvah. Hashem should bless us all. We should all merit to fulfill the mitzvah of Challah in the temple speedily in our days. Amen.